I'm Joanna O'Connell. Welcome to The Road to Cannes, a Beat TV series presented by Freewheel. I'm here with Adam Gerhart. Adam is the CEO globally of Mindshare, where he leads strategy and operations for the agency network, overseeing billions in client media spend. Thanks for being here, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
So, your organization helps manage billions of dollars on behalf of your clients. What are some macro trends that you're seeing right now in terms of client investment, just given kind of global and macroeconomic trends?
So I think if we zoom pretty far back and we just look at things from a broad environmental perspective, I think one of the things that we're seeing is obviously advertising continues to grow. And if we look at it over a 3-year stack through the pandemic and that sort of thing, it's up, and it's up pretty substantially. One of the biggest challenges that we've seen is such wild fluctuations by vertical and by industry sector. And I don't think we've seen that in decades, where we have some industries and verticals through the pandemic that were way down and they're now starting to see explosive growth. Travel, hospitality, tourism, those sorts of things.
Totally.
We've got kind of steady states like the CPGs, and then we've got technology and auto that are starting to ramp up on production or whatever the case may be, and they're coming back. And I think all of that creates an interesting dynamic because it kind of balances out and we see some ebbs and flows. And all of that, I think, is an interesting backdrop for what we're seeing from a performance perspective and what advertisers are starting to really look for.
Yeah.
Where there's been this mindset over the last kind of 18 months in particular that's really heightened around short-term performance outcomes.
This is what I was wondering. All right.
It's really, how do we maximize every single dollar? How do we make ourselves as efficient and effective as possible? And I think, interestingly, we're starting to see a lot of companies think that they've overswung on that pendulum. And so we've got big brands and big businesses that are starting to actually see it take an impact and some ramifications on brand equity.
Okay. Oh, I was going to say business performance, but brand equity is even more interesting because that's a very long-term kind of endeavor. I was also thinking, you said efficiency and effectiveness, and I think sometimes those things are treated as though they're the same. Like if it's cheaper, it's better, right? But that's not the case, right? We know that. So can you talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, I mean, we fundamentally believe that not all growth is created equal.
Right.
I can help your business grow. You can help your business grow by changing your price point.
Sure.
You can cut your media investment and your ROI is going to go through the roof.
Right.
But that's very short term and that's not sustainable over the long term. We are in the service of helping clients understand how they can create meaningful and lasting business results. And that's the biggest challenge right now is how do we create that balance and how do we strike that balance through every facet of the marketing ecosystem.
Totally. And you mentioned, so they were seeing a hit with brand equity, some of them.
Yeah.
That's encouraging them essentially to come back.
I think it took about 12 to 18 months for a lot of clients and a lot of brands to start to see it, but we're seeing it play out in brand health and equity scores that are now coming to light post-COVID when everybody was putting money into kind of short-term, performance outcomes.
Okay, interesting. So we're right on the edge of the sort of upfronts, right? The new fronts and the upfronts are really underway now. And every year I sort of think to myself, is this the year that things are really going to look different in the upfronts? Because we've been talking about how they needed to evolve for a long time. So how are you, as a global CEO of an agency, thinking about this year's upfronts? How cross-platform will the buying be? How advanced will the audiences be? Talk about that for a second.
So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head where the conversations around audiences will take the forefront of conversation. Unfortunately, I don't think we're at a point, though, where we're going to start to see that manifest in meaningful change.
Okay.
We're still at a place where there isn't ubiquitous measurement, there isn't ubiquitous currency, and until we get to that place, I think we're still going to see some marginal changes, but we're not going to see true palpable change in the way in which, brands and businesses tackle the upfront. So I think it's why we're starting to see a lot of pressure and a lot of movement and a lot of people coming together, quite honestly, to tackle some of those more fundamental underlying issues, which will allow us to trade on different currencies to change the upfronts.
Well, I always wonder too, does it feel like your clients are pushing you or you are pushing your clients or both for change?
It has to be both.
Yeah.
There's no question because we need the clients to lock arms with us and with the entirety of the ecosystem if we are going to create some meaningful change. It can't come from one part and not have the others on board. So yeah, we're seeing it come from our side, from clients, we're seeing it come from our partners, we're seeing it come from measurement companies, and all of those have a critical role in helping to change the game as we move forward.
So speaking of moving forward, we are also right on the cusp of Cannes. It's just an incredibly interesting time right now with AI, which has really become uber pervasive. I think it used to be something that us in the advertising industry understood was happening, but it was behind the scenes. We now live in the era of ChatGPT and generative AI, which makes it feel as though it has really hit the mainstream. Great opportunity, great risk. Can you talk a little bit about how you are advising your clients to navigate?
Yeah, I think it is, first of all, we're incredibly excited by the changes that are happening around us, but it does have to be taken with a careful dose of caution.
Yes.
It raises all sorts of issues when we think of ChatGPT from a consumer perspective, a usage perspective. If we think of generative AI when it comes to creative or PR, recently we saw the Pope show up with a branded coat from a particular company. Those sorts of things are going to cause even more scrutiny and skepticism from consumers, raising issues that we haven't tackled around ethics and behavior and compliance that, quite honestly, we've seen, but I think in a way that pales in comparison to what generative AI is going to do to the industry.
I totally agree. It genuinely feels like we're at the tip of the iceberg. Just as there's skepticism and concern, there's also mass adoption without total understanding.
Entirely.
Right? And so that creates a lot of challenge. How do you think about that for the agency network of which you are a part? You're a global leader. AI is going to continue to impact your business and how your employees do their jobs as they're producing work for clients. How do you manage that?
I think if I start to break it down a little bit, it becomes a little bit more manageable as we think through the practical application. I think from a creative perspective, it's going to revolutionize the way in which we iterate on creative. Things like DCO will explode because all of a sudden you've got so many permutations of ads. You will still need the big iconic brand idea and brand message that truly, at least at this stage, I think humans need to sit behind. So from a creative perspective, it will change radically. From a PR perspective, it will change radically. When you think about the role of influencers and the content that they can create through things like ChatGPT. From a media perspective, though, I think the application is more in the analytics side of things, understanding and predicting outcomes as opposed to building wholesale media plans. And I think that becomes hugely compelling as we start to work through the balance of what we were talking about earlier, brand versus performance, and all of those dynamics that are at play right now.
How about performant brand? Can that be a thing?
Brandformance. There's all sorts of words right now. Yeah.
There you go. So I suppose on the theme of both Cannes and AI, what are you anticipating are going to be some sort of big tentpole topics that come up at Cannes this year?
So I think there will be the usual discussions around things like retail media and retail media networks. There will be even more focus on gaming. I read a stat the other day that the number of gaming-related entries is up 74% over the last couple of years. But I think selfishly, one of the things that I'm most excited about is there is a new category called Excellence in Media Craft that is only for media agencies to enter. And I think that is shining a light on the role and the emphasis of media in the entire advertising ecosystem moving forward. How creative it can be, how rigorous it can be, how accountable it can be. And I think for us, and obviously it's self-serving, I think it creates an opportunity to shine a light on the craft of media that maybe didn't exist, at least at Cannes, to the extent that it did in some other award shows.
I absolutely love that. I love that. No, truly. I mean, I do, because if you think about media in the most reductionist way, it's sort of like, oh, you're buying, you're selling, you're transacting on a thing called media. But media is a huge part of the actual consumer experience, right? And the fragmentation, the complexity, the magic that is media right now, from a consumer experience standpoint, that's encouraging. I'm so glad to hear that.
Good.
One last thing, because you are a global CEO, can you talk a little bit about how you manage the complexity of cross-country kinds of activities when it comes to media?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it goes back to some of the trends that we were talking about earlier, the ups and downs of spends and volatility and that sort of thing. One of the biggest things, though, it comes down to the infrastructure of most of the markets and the prevalence of platforms, especially right now. As we enter this era of kind of platform dominance, what that means to consumers in a market is wildly different, where some markets are consuming everything on their mobile phones, some markets everything through a multitude of devices, and it means that the interoperability of ecosystems becomes much, much more critical, whether it's measurement, whether it's understanding the fluidity of consumers across devices. From a media perspective, how do we create accountabilities and measurement frameworks on the back end of all of those? But I think that's the really interesting thing of what we do. How do we find ideas that can scale across markets, across boundaries, especially as platform dominance means that everything is borderless in the future?
Wow. Borderless future, but local complexity.
Entirely.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adam. So interesting.
Thanks.
I'm definitely excited to see you in Cannes.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.